Hi, my fellow book lovers. My name is Lena, and today I would like to wrap up the books, concretely the novels and other texts that I have read in the month of October. There are some exceptions today. I will not wrap up everything. The books that I am not going to talk about include Hide by Kirsten White, as I have already done a reading vlog around it. This is about a group of 14 people who are all hiding in an amusement park for 7 days to win a monetary prize. But things turn dark when we discover who the actual seeker is. I am also not going to talk about the Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, as this is the last video that I've posted before this. I have done a third impressions video on it, so I am comparing it to two other books that I have read by him previously, but also talking on this one specifically. Both of the videos that I have just mentioned I will link down below, or you can go on my channel and look them up. And then finally, I'm also not going to talk about Die Rotte, or The Route, I think in English. This is by Marcus Fischer, an author that I actually personally know and therefore am not able to review. But also this is like a new Austrian release and it's not translated, so I don't think that people will gain anything from me talking about this. So let's actually talk about some books now, shall we? The first book that I would like to talk about is The Slade House by David Mitchell. This is about the owners of a house who every 9 years invite a guest into the building, but nobody knows what actually happens to them. But we as a reader are slowly figuring out what is going on and what is behind the vanishing as we read the story of each guest. This is for friends of the paranormal and surreal with an element of mystery to it. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a haunted house story. It's more of a horror for the mind, or psychological horror, if you will. The reason behind it may not be the most original that you've ever read, but the way that it was approached was somewhat new, and at least I enjoyed the journey very much. Next, in the month of October, I finished the series 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. So I read book 1 and 2, I think in September, and then finished the third book in October. And before I talk about the contents of the book, I want to talk about the title. If you were wondering why 1Q84, Q is the Japanese pronunciation for the number 9, as well as the pronunciation for the letter of the English alphabet. And this is just a play on word symbolizing a parallel universe or an alternating time string. So this is that, and now let's talk about the story of Tango and Aomame, who are the main characters in this story. This is a tale of magical realism in which we follow the two sad main characters who are slowly figuring out that the world that they are living in is somewhat not what they used to. So we as readers accompany them on their journey as they get more and more entangled in a fate that is slowly unfolding in front of us. I for myself can't argue that I don't find this book very compelling in a very Murakami way, but I also know for a fact that I would read a book about apple trees if he ever was to sit down and write one on apple trees. Like, I just devour everything that this man writes. However, I did have certain problems with the book, but I still don't really feel like I can place the story all too well. For example, one of the problems that I had with the story was that it felt a bit protracted. Sometimes the events were just moving a tiny bit too slowly. This could also be due to the fact that this book is divided in 3 parts, and every part is supposed to cover a time span of roughly 3 months. And maybe if you don't have that much to tell, especially with the last book, it just feels a bit elongated. Secondly, I also felt a certain desynchronization with some actions of the characters, especially with Aomame. I oftentimes just couldn't understand why she didn't see a very, to me, obvious conclusion to certain situations, but at other times jumped to conclusions that I was that I did not understand. This, however, mirrored the feeling that I felt like was going on in the book, of a very desynchronized world, of something just not being right. So I don't know if this is actually quite brilliant or just bad. I can't really tell. Or maybe it's like a cultural difference as well. I'm really torn on that one. I will admit that I couldn't make head nor tail of the story, and there were a lot of things that I felt were left unanswered. Overall, the thoughts that I've just mentioned I also saw reflected in a lot of comments by Western Goodreads users. And I also looked at Wikipedia, and they said that the Time magazine said it was one of the worst Murakami books, or the worst Murakami books out there, as well as the New York Times stating that it was 1,000 uneventful pages. This, however, is only representing the Western opinion on the book. I think that it got really highly praised by Japanese newspapers. I think the Japanese Times named it a contemporary Japanese classic, which is a must-read. So, you know, I really don't know what to make of it. It's still his writing, you know, and it's very captivating, and it's still a lovely story. Next, I'm going to talk about Illuminae by Amie Kaufman and J. Kristoff. This is the story of two teenagers or young adults, I think they're either 17 or 18, namely Katie and Ezra, whose planet has been destroyed or invaded, and then the population on it mainly killed, and who are now on a very huge, or two very huge spaceships fleeing from the intruder. So far for the plot, now the emotions. So if you've seen any other of my videos, you already know that I was just not the target audience for this. This is directed at a much younger audience, and also someone who likes sci-fi. So this is where my subjective bad rating comes from, obviously. I mean, to me, the characters were really cliched, the plot was super simplistic and superficial, super superficial, and also the dialogues were so cringy, and the jokes so tacky. I'm so sorry, the cringe was just full on with this one for me. But what I will admit, however, is that the format of this being mixed media, like the story being presented to you in a sort of way through surveillance footage, diary entrances, also I think psychological reports, chat conversations, like this is super fun. So it wasn't unbearable to read it. It's also quite a quick read, which is fun because this is not a thin book, but I read it in 2 days. So I just want to tell you, like, even for a slow reader, it was possible to read this very quickly. Now, I don't want to hate on it too much. I can see how this is fun to some people, so I want to give it that, but to me it was just a fail, I'm sorry. Then I am going to talk about Gillian Flynn's The Adult.
Okay, I don't know where that came from, but what's the book called again?
Gillian Flynn's The Grownup. And this is a short story actually being first released in 2014 in an anthology called Rogue, and then being re-released as a standalone after winning a short story prize in 2015. As they say on the back, this is an homage to the classic ghost story, and it follows a sex worker / make-believe fortune teller who then gets commissioned to cleanse the spirits in a possessed manner. Possessed, I don't know, but haunted manner maybe. And although to me it felt like I knew what was going to be the outcome of this meeting of the fortune teller and the woman that hires her, it still nonetheless managed to surprise me, as the ending took turns that I was not able to foresee. And if you are yourself a fan of unsettling endings, well, why not try out The Grownup by Gillian Flynn? Next, I have read The Outsider by Stephen King. This is the story of a brutal murder on a child and the impossibility of a man being the culprit who was seemingly at two places at once, as the evidence as well as his alibi seemed to be airtight. This struck me as a sort of Agatha Christie meets Stephen King, and I have to say that the first part, about the investigation, was so compelling, and I thought this to be actually super well written, and maybe one of the better ones of his newer books, although I don't really feel confident in saying that. So many new books I have not read by him. Unfortunately though, for me at least, this took a turn for the worse, since the second part of this is very much where I would locate the more Stephen King side to the story. So the story actually felt like it was split into two parts, and I mean, it's just really stupid of me to not expect a Stephen King from a Stephen King. I mean, that makes it sound like I dislike Stephen King, which is not at all the case. This just took a turn that I maybe was not into as much at the moment. Another critique would maybe be that this story, especially the second part of it, felt just too long. This could have been edited down to make it more precise, to bring the point across more, just to make it overall a little bit sharper and refined. And also I found to see some topics and themes or storylines that I've already read in other Stephen King books, but there was not too much of it and it didn't feel like a replica. Now, my final horror in this wrap-up is going to be Ghostwall by Sarah Moss. This tells the story of a family that is following an anthropology professor on his camping expedition in the woods to see how life would have been during the Iron Age. But soon we will discover that something is very wrong, as this turns into a domestic nightmare. This book is mainly plot-driven, yet it is still insightful and reflective, as the book not only talks about the matters on hand. I wanted to share something about the book that I found in The Guardian, which I couldn't have said any better. So the writer of the article, which I will also link down below, says that Moss is quick to reveal the skull beneath the skin to remind us of the violence of a life lived in close touch with nature. It's a violence that Bill, who is the father, alarmingly welcomes, that he seems to feel gives license to his own violence. But this I just also wanted to share because I feel like it says a lot about the contents of the book. And now for the last book that I would like to wrap up, going away from the topic of horror and moving to something Japan related. I have last month finished the book Japanese Mythologie, or Nihongi, by Karl Florenz, which I believe to be just a German translation, but there will be something similar in English, as this is just a retelling of Japanese traditional myths, especially beginning with Inagi and Izanami, and the creation of Japan itself, and this ends right before the transition into the world of men, so this only stays in a godly realm. Based on my understanding, the way that the stories are presented in here, it is done in the fashion of the Nihon Shoki, which together with the Kojiki is one of the two oldest surviving written books in Japan, and both of them are the main sources for what is known about the ancient Japanese mythology. The Nihon Shoki, which is what this is more leaning towards, is featuring several versions of one myth. So as I said, this is very similar, but it just stops at an earlier point. It is also very well researched, as I've already showed you once. Like this is, if you want to nerd out on Japanese mythology, you absolutely can with this. Me, for my part, I have only read the myths, as this is what I wanted to get to know. However, if you want to really pigeonhole it and like categorize what you've just read, put a frame around it, put it into broader perspective, understand it on a deeper level, I would actually advise you to do a little bit research on the backgrounds of the myth, on the interpretation of it, read some more, and for that matter I have read, or at least half of it. This is not a book that I have finished, The Japanese Myths, Guide to Gods, Heroes and Spirits by Joshua Frydman. I have only read it around halfway, however I've already covered the part that is told in here. So I feel confident on saying that this helped me to organize my thoughts and the stories that were told. This also talks about the myths that were transitioned into the world of men, as well as about modern Japanese mythology and how the older myths are now incorporated in the storytelling of today. The only downside to this is that there's quite a lot of information in here, so it doesn't really go into depth. And it stays sort of an overview. So if you are interested in a more specific topic, I would rather advise you to go out and look for something like some literature that is talking specifically about that. So together and in combination, I feel like those two books were truly complementing each other, and I was able to gain the most from this because I also had the help of this. So that's it with my October wrap up, and in a couple of days from now I'm gonna post the manga and graphic novel wrap up. So if you're not subscribed yet and you were interested in a similar format as this, just with graphic novels and mangas, maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss my next upload. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at another time in another video. Bye!